Well, well, well. Look who's come back to my street corner to buy some of the good stuff. And I know we're not talking about Flintstones vitamins. No. We're talking about the real good stuff. Good stuff, But seriously, welcome back to a new episode of Battle Guides featuring Clinhyde 8, the Special Operative. Clinhyde is a universalist brawler whose abilities and options are further magnified by the use of his stim unique abilities. However, his stims come at the cost of life. Couple that in with his difficulty in disabling his stims, and you'll see that Clinhyde is one character who's built upon the concept of risk and reward. Clinhyde's unique ability is Power Suit. Clinhyde starts the game with 3 deactivated stims, and as an anti you may activate one of them. Then, at the end of the anti-step, he loses life equal to the amount of active stims he has. Note that stims have 2 effects, an active effect and a while active effect. Active effect only applies on the beat that you activate the stim, while the while active effect is in effect as long as the stim is active, meaning that on the beat you activate a specific stim, both effects will be in play. When talking about Clinhyde's unique ability, it's very important to know your stims. So let's start with Earlite. Earlite is the priority stim, and it's really amazing considering that a lot of Clinhyde's styles already have positive priority on them. Couple this stim in and you'll be faster than most of the characters in Devastation, especially those without really high priority styles. Charisma, on the other hand, is the power stim, making Clinhyde deal more damage. Now, Clinhyde's cards mainly comprise of attacks that have negative power. However, with this in play, all of those negatives become +0s instead. And all of the +0s become +1s and so on and so forth, making Clinhyde one fast and powerful hitting character, especially on the beat that you activate this particular stim. And finally, we have Hylatine. Hylatine infusion is the defensive stim, giving Clinhyde Soak on the beat he activates it, and Stun Guard 2 on every beat aside from that. Now this basically gives Clinhyde an effective Stun Guard 4 on the beat he activates it, and Stun Guard 2 on every subsequent beat, making it so that grasps are no longer as scary, and fast, soft-hitting characters no longer scare Clinhyde even if he's not as fast as they are. The key to using Clinhyde's unique ability is knowing how to manage your stims. A good Clinhyde does not, and I repeat, does not activate all of his stims as fast as possible, even if that gives him the maximum amount of stats. Because of the life cost these things have, they're really compounding, especially if you consider the fact that it's really hard to deactivate these things. So when using Clinhyde, only anti-stims if you know it's going to benefit you this beat and probably the next 4 because it's that hard to disable them. However, know that using Clinhyde's not really about using all the stims. The stims are just icing on top of the cake that is Clinhyde. When using Clinhyde, remember that it's all about options and the Clinhyde Vortex, which I'll explain later on. Let's start off with Gravity. Gravity is a long-range but upward-range style with mediocre power and mediocre speed. However, it does have a great passive effect and an even better on-hit effect. One good thing I realized when using this style is you can use it with Drive even if you're at range 2, because you can use the passive effect to ignore your own movement effects, meaning that you can choose to ignore drives before activating. Other than that, I mainly use this card in conjunction with Grasp or Strike in order to give those 2 bases the range they so desperately need. Another thing to consider is the fact that this card is great against slower characters who require them to be in specific positionings to hit. With this card and coupled in with a few Airlight infusions, you can make any character's positionings totally hard to deal with. phases Clinhyde's slower attack that deals a lot of damage while having some of the best range on a card I've ever seen. However, this all does come at an extreme cost, and that's its two passive effects. One which states that opponents who move can't hit Clinhyde, and another one that states that you can only hit opponents that have moved. This basically means that this card is better reactively because that gives your opponent chances to move, and at the same time, it's pretty much useless against opponents who don't move at all. So if you play this right in predicting your opponent, this could result in a really good trade for you. Couple it in with a few charisma infusions and you can see the life gap just utterly widen in front of your eyes. Now for bases, I highly suggest using Strike in order to take advantage of the huge range as well as Strike's low priority, or Burst. So just in case your opponent doesn't move, you can still dodge his stationary attacks. But be careful of a Shock. Next up is Shock. Shock is fast but not that hard hitting. It has a before activating effect that says Clinhyde can move 3 or more spaces, which means he can't choose to move less than 3 spaces with the effect. Now, remember that this effect is not just about advancing. You can use this to retreat, which gives you a great way of dodging melee attacks. Aside from that, the on damage effect at range 1 allows Clinhyde to stun opponents, which might not sound as useful to many of you, but basically it means that Clinhyde ignores stun guard when he uses this at range 1. So, in order to take advantage of those, I highly suggest using Shock Drive, because Shock Drive allows Clinhyde to cover the entire board with movement effects, or Shock Grasp in order to make this attack even faster. But remember that since this attack is not that hard hitting, I highly suggest using Charisma Infusions or Earlight Infusions, depending on the opponent you're facing. Diffusion is one of Clinhyde's best brawling styles because of its high range and high priority and on-hit effect, which makes this a great card even if it doesn't deal a lot of damage. The on-hit effect is to be noted because if you end the on-hit effect with your opponent against the wall, Clinhyde will make that opponent lose 2 life, which technically gives this card power plus 2, but it doesn't stun the opponent, so be careful with that. On damage, this card also allows Clinhyde to deactivate a stim. Thank you. So this card lets you deactivate a stim that you might need later on, or if you just want to start conserving your life. As end of beat effect of this card also means that Clinhyde becomes adjacent to the opponent, which makes this card great for cornering opponents, which Clinhyde really, absolutely loves to do. It is to be noted that since this card doesn't have a lot of power, the Charisma Infusion is a lifesaver. But if your opponent is somewhat fast, the Earlight will do wonders as well. In terms of bases, I highly suggest using Grasp so that you can get your opponent to the wall much easier, or Drives because that gives this card way more effective range. Toxic is one of Clinhyde's scariest cards because it allows him to double up on his wild active effects, giving Airlight more priority, Charisma more power, and Hylatine more stun guard. Aside from that, the start of beat effect allows Clinhyde to advance 1 space, then repeat the effect for each stim he has active. This, combined with a lot of stims, proves to be a great gap closer, especially against opponents who don't have their bursts. But aside from that, the start of beat can be used to activate a corner cross, but only if you have 0 or 2 stims active. Now, one thing to realize when using this card is the fact that if you play this on a beat that you choose to activate the stim, it can yield a lot of stat boosts, which will give you a huge advantage against a majority of opponents. However, be careful. Because of the nature of your stims and because of the nature of this card, people will want to dash this card often. And if you get dashed, unlike many characters with scary styles, Clinhyde actually loses because he loses a lot of life if he gets dashed. Now, if you're going to use this card, I highly suggest using it with Frenzy. so that you can activate all of your stims, then deactivate all of them when your awesome attack is done, or drive so that you can cover the distance that the SOB advance does not. And finally, we end with Clinhyde's unique base, Frenzy. Frenzy's power is variable because of the fact that its power is equal to the amount of active stims you have plus 1, meaning that this attack can deal either 1 or 4 damage depending on your stims. That's without counting the bonuses from stims. Aside from that, it lets you advance 1 space, and the more important part is after activating, Clinhyde finally gets to disable any number of stims he has. This card is amazing because it can deal a lot, and I mean a lot of damage if coupled with the right cards. However, be careful because this card can get clashed quite often because its priority is only 3. So watch out for that. Otherwise, this card is a lifesaver, literally, because the after activating effect allows you to disable your stims. Do note that it's okay to get dashed, and it's okay if your opponent dodges this attack, because it's after activating, meaning that as long as you don't get stunned, you are fine. Now, in terms of good pairs with this card, I highly suggest Shock, so that you can stun those pesky stun guards, and Toxic, so that you can cash out on all the damage. Clinhyde's 2 Overdrive finishers are Vital Silver Infusion and Witherwhite Infusion. Now, both of these attacks basically have the same purpose, but with just different effects. So I'll go over them technically at the same time. Both of these attacks have not applicable range, not applicable power, but 4 priority. And after activating, they give you 2 different effects. Vital Silver Infusion gives you plus 10 life, meaning that you can heal 10 life, but at the cost of losing 1 life every beat after that. On the other hand, we have Witherwhite Infusion, which gives Clinhyde range plus 0 to 2 on all of his attacks, which is pretty good. Note that since Clinhyde loses a lot of life on stims, you'll get to activate your Overdrive finishers faster. Now, it really depends on your playstyle on which one you want. If you want more time, you probably might want Vital Silver Infusion. But if you're great with fighting at 1 life, I really suggest taking the Witherwhite Infusion. Now, for other uses of a special action, Cancel is one good thing to go with because Clinhyde is a brawler and brawlers love disabling enemy options. However, and I will warn you right now, never, ever Pulse. Pulse is your enemy. Now, let's move on to the thing that most of you will probably want to hear about. Clinhyde advanced strategies, and boy is there a lot of advanced strategies with this guy. But I'll say this now, manage your stims. A good Clinhyde doesn't have 3 stims active. Because having 3 stims active is losing 3 life every beat. And you won't need every single one of those passive effects. Trust me, you won't. Because if you have a lot of priority, you won't be needing the stun guard, and vice versa. So what does that mean for Clinhyde? It means that you can't activate your stims willy-nilly. Meaning that when you activate them, it has to result in Clinhyde winning the beat completely, or at least preventing himself from losing a lot of life. Otherwise, I just suggest trying to brawl because Clinhyde's cards are utterly amazing without the stims. Stims are meant as a bonus and as a means of making yourself safe in certain situations, which I'll go on later on. But they're not just something you activate because you want to, or because you want to deal 1 extra point of damage. That 1 point of damage is not worth it, unless it's the difference between stunning your opponent and not. Know which situations that extra stat will matter. Otherwise, don't use the stims, because they're just a waste of life. The Clinhyde Vortex is basically a combination of Clinhyde's 3 styles, which are Gravity, Shock, and Phase. These 3 together, especially at beat 1, make Clinhyde one tough customer because all of their strengths play into each other, meaning that there is no one straightforward way for Clinhyde to play that beat. So with all of those, it makes your opponent's guessing and thought process that much harder. giving you more leeway to brawl and surprise your opponent. Remember, aside from that, Clinhyde's main strength comes from unpredictability. Because of a lot of his cards, give him a lot of leeway in performing specific attack combinations. Heck, Shock Shot is a decent attack on Clinhyde. And that surprises a lot of people, apparently. And one final advanced strategy I have for all of you is making Frenzy safe. Frenzy is a moderately fast attack, only 3 priority. But with a combination of your styles and your stims, Frenzy can become one safe attack that allows you to cleanse you of all of your pesky stims. Now, few examples of making Frenzy safe are as follows. Number 1, using Phase against an opponent who moves a lot. We can anti the Airlight Infusion to make Frenzy faster. We can anti the Hylatine Infusion and give this attack effective Stun Guard 4, which is again greater than the magical Stun Guard 3. Use Toxic Frenzy. That'll give this attack really big priority, especially with the Airlight Infusion, or effective Stun Guard 6 if you anti the Hylatine. Either way, this attack becomes almost relatively safe when using. Just be careful of your opponent's clashes. Now, when it comes to Clinhyde combos, I admit I'm heavily biased in using Toxic Frenzy. Now, I've gone over all of the positive points on this card. It can basically make Frenzy safe while giving you some of the biggest stats and damage you can see in the game. One problem with this attack, though, is that your opponent can burst it very easily. So be careful when doing that. Next up, we have Shock Drive. Shock Drive is completely amazing because it has technically full board range while dealing moderately okay damage and has a lot of priority. One thing to note is that depending on which stims you have active, this attack can deal a lot of damage or be extremely fast. And finally, we have the Fusion Grasp. The Fusion Grasp is extremely fast but doesn't deal a lot of damage. However, if you activate certain stims, again, you can either be even faster or deal decent amount of damage. The great thing to note is that the on-hit effects of both of these cards synergize well with each other, allowing you to put your opponent into the corner. And that pretty much does it for this episode of Battle Guides featuring Clinhyde 8. Now if you're planning to take our special operative on a mission, here are a few last-minute tips. Number 1, I already warned all of you, manage your stims. Stims are not just for big numbers. Remember that you should only anti them if the numbers will make a big difference. Number 2, Toxic Frenzy. Toxic Frenzy is one thing that I have to emphasize here, because Toxic Frenzy is the way to go if you want to cash in on damage and cleanse yourself of all of your stims. Remember, a good Clinhyde knows how to make his Frenzy safe. And finally, I really have to say this, Dash is your enemy. I hate saying this, but Clinhyde's one of the few characters you rarely dash with, which is pretty much why he has so many movement options on him. Because dashing with Clinhyde is bad for you. Getting dashed as Clinhyde is also bad for you. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this episode. I'd just like to thank all of you who are watching this video right now for all of your support and all of your comments. If you guys are interested with level 99 games, BattleCON, or anything World of Indines related, you can look in the description down below. On the other hand, if you want to talk to more BattleCON veterans such as me, or play with us on the forums, we have links to the forums down below as well. And this week, well rather a few days ago, the War Remastered Kickstarter, well, went up on Kickstarter, and it's already 300% funded, guys. So there's absolutely no risk at all of it not getting funded. So if you guys are interested in getting War of Indines Remastered, I highly suggest to check the description out below, where I'll post the Kickstarter link. So thank you very much for watching, and remember, don't forget your special action. Thank you, World of Indines. Thank you, and good night.